FAU. And we are working on a gamification project together. So Emmalyn is going to come in and share like why gamification works and what goes on behind the scenes. So I'm going to turn it over to you. Wait a minute, let me start the record button, or did you start that already?
I hit it for you.
Thank you. See, she's the best.
All right. Well, thank you for this opportunity. I'm definitely excited and looking forward to sharing some of my findings and talking about kind of the behind the scenes of gamification. So as Dr. Brown said, my name is Emmalyn Green. I'm a doctoral candidate at Florida Atlantic University in the College of Education, studying curriculum and instruction with a focus on educational technology. I'm also a former classroom teacher that taught during, before, and after the pandemic. And during that time is really where my love for gamification started to grow, which has led me to my studies and research on it today. So before we dive into the elements of gamification, I wanted to give a little bit of background just about what it is. There's a lot of different popular definitions out there. Things that, for example, a tool that transforms a repetitive behavior into a habit with internalizing extrinsic motivators, right? Talking about self-regulated behaviors that can come from it. Oftentimes people talk about the digital tools and digital games being used in an education setting to aid learning. But from my research, the most common definition that I have seen is pretty simple. It's the use of game design elements in non-game context. So although the definitions may vary, they all share about the many different benefits of gamification, from increased academic achievement, the engagement overall in the class, as well as motivation and building a sense of community. And if we think about that as educators, those are all wonderful things that we would want to be a part of our classroom. In fact, many educational technology tools now are combining both the academic and non-academic experiences to help improve the overall student experience through gamification, which I think is a really exciting evolution to see as it continues to evolve and transform. So digital gamification not only addresses what students are learning, but also how and when they get to learn. So students really become the center of the learning process by implementing things such as gamification. And as it rapidly evolves, as our technology continues to rapidly evolve in our classroom, it's more important to understand how the different elements are evolving and to understand the foundational principles, which is what we're going to talk about today. And this is also, I think, important for educators, but also some potential implications for designers, because as they're designing, developing, and enhancing these tools and platforms, there's a lot to be thinking about behind the scenes. So let's go ahead and we're going to dive right into the different affordances. So during a plethora of research, there were over 47 different game elements that were grouped into these three main affordances. The first being our immersion-oriented affordances. So these are focused on virtual realities. Oh, no problem, Deborah. Thanks for letting me know. So this is focused on one of, I feel like, the most trendy pieces of educational technology recently, which is the VR. So this is actually taking the students and bringing them into the experience, whether that's part of a storyline, and they're seen interacting with it more. A really great example to help you think about what that looks like would be Transfer VR. They're an organization that takes the virtual reality goggles and then actually teaches students about the trades through that. So they're learning how to change different parts of a car. If they want to get into HVAC, there's actual simulations that the students can use to get that hands-on virtual experience. That can be through goggles as well as through other mediums. Then you have your progression-oriented affordances. So these are focused on gamified elements that show progress being made. So examples of this are probably some of the most common that you would see, like badges, leaderboards, rankings, progress bars, increasingly difficult levels. So a student gets to this point, then next they'll jump up. An example of this in the classroom that I've seen is with programs such as Reading Plus or iReady that are monitoring the students' progress, and they're watching their progress improve, and then they get bumped up to the next level. Sometimes that unlocks different benefits, maybe more reading genres that they can choose from and things like that. And then social oriented affordances are the affordances that connect the individuals and allow them to collaborate with one another. So this creates a sense of, cooperation, competition. Sometimes this can be the social networking features and team features. Many applications are now implementing like chat features so that students can connect and talk about the different classroom assignments offline as well. And this one, I think, is one of the areas that has a lot of opportunity to really grow and impact the digital learning environment, because when we're connecting through Zoom or Google Meet or whatever it might be, you lose a little bit of that face-to-face, but through the social oriented affordances, you can really bring back that sense of community to help people continue to connect outside of the Zoom or Google Meet platform. So today we're going to talk about 3 theories that I think have very strong connections to gamification. And by just understanding the basis of them, I think as educators, game designers, instructional designers, in whatever capacity we're using this, it can really help enhance our understanding, and in doing so, help our students' experience with it. And as part of that, there's a lot of benefits we'll talk about later. So we'll look at self-determination theory, social exchange theory, as well as behaviorism. So starting off with behaviorism, all behaviors are learned through interaction with the environment is the basic premise. So learners experience extrinsic and extrinsic motivation when using gamification, which can lead to changing behavior. It's very interesting to look at the extrinsic versus intrinsic. And ultimately, I think we would love all of our students to have this intrinsic love of learning, right? Naturally, they love math, science, English. We know that that's not the case. Some people might have an intrinsic love towards one subject or the other, but through gamification, you can actually hone in on those extrinsic features and over time help it develop into some intrinsic motivation towards the subject area, a love for learning as well, which leads to that changing behavior. Gamification allows for learning to happen individually as the learner feels extrinsically motivated through gaining points, winning awards. It really does depend on which affordance you're working with. So for example, if it's an immersion oriented affordance, it could have a different type of motivation associated with it, which we're going to look at a little later. But overall, it's really a motivational opportunity to help our students develop that love for learning, that interest in the subject area, and build that excitement, especially when it comes to the progression oriented affordances. So next is social exchange theory that we're going to look at. This is based on the idea that a relationship between 2 people is created through a process of cost-benefit analysis. As someone who has a base in education, I always think it's interesting to think about social exchange, because oftentimes people associate that with like the business world or marketing, but it really has a foundation in education, especially with gamification. If you think about it, the benefits of gamified learning can include, for example, you're giving up time, but you are gaining qualifications, such as possibly a micro credential or a different level that you're achieving, as well as the social interaction. If you think about in a virtual environment, if a student is taking a class every single day, but it's fully remote, then they're going to say, hey, I'm fully remote, but if I take the time to participate in this gamification activity, whether it's a chat feature, whether it's some cooperation, a challenge, the social interaction is a win for them, because that's the cost of an online class, but they're earning, right? They're doing this extra work, but they're earning that opportunity to interact with their peers. So again, that cost benefit, it might take more time, but I'm getting this out of it. The benefits can help increase the perception of usefulness and enjoyment, which are key indicators of our social exchange theory. So for a student, it's more than just going to the class and learning it, right? There's other perceived usefulness they're getting out of it, the enjoyment, the fun, through those different affordances, which can enhance their engagement with the class, their motivation, and their overall academic success. And then the biggest one that we're going to really hone in on today is self-determination theory, also known as SDT. And so this talks about people are motivated to grow and change by 3 psychological needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So when I'm looking at these 3, I just want to kind of give you a better idea of what each would be. So with competency, it's the feeling of being effective in ongoing interactions with the social environment and experiencing opportunities to exercise and express one's capacities. And then for autonomy, it's their choice, their willingness to perform a task. An example of that is providing students with that choice with multiple opportunities to choose. And then our relatedness is defined as that connectedness. A lot of that goes back to the social interaction of being cared for, being cared by those others, a sense of belonging in the class, in the school community. And so again, examples of that would be more of the social oriented affordances that provide the students with that opportunity to connect with their teachers, their peers, in whatever capacity that might be. So these three needs can all help to create meaningfulness for a student, which leads to student engagement and improved outcomes. So through gamification, students are able to participate in learning activities because they want to, and in doing so, self-determine their own learning paths. I'm very excited because one of the research projects that I'll be working on throughout the next year or two is looking at how gamification can lead to the self-regulated learning behaviors. And so I think that, again, goes very hand in hand with self-determination, developing those skills through autonomy, competence, and relatedness. I found something that was very interesting with the three of these, though, because as I did more research, I saw that there were many examples, let's say, of autonomy, and then maybe less of competence in terms of gamification elements. And so one of the studies that I looked at, they prioritized competence because they thought it was the most important of all of the three. However, another study showcased that competence will not increase intrinsic motivation unless there's feelings of autonomy. So it really is a balancing act of trying to balance the autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And a lot of ed tech tools do a really nice job of doing that. But I think as educators, being aware of which are being targeted and trying to make sure that we're providing students with an opportunity to have choice, to have the social affordances, and again, a balance between all of those different pieces. Let's see, we're going to go ahead and look next at a chart that breaks that down a little bit more. So this chart was based on many different articles that I read that researched the different gamification elements and then where they would fall in terms of social self-determination theory with competency, autonomy, and relatedness. And I thought this was really interesting. So when you're thinking about the affordances, right, and we're thinking about things like points and badges and leaderboards, that might fall more under a feeling of competency. But then when students, for example, get the choice to maybe pick their own avatars, decide what storyline they want to play in, customize their avatar, that's giving them more of a choice, the autonomy. And then through some of the stories and then the sense of community, we can give them that sense of relatedness connected to the outside world. So I think there's a lot of work that has a lot of potential to be done in this area and really looking at how these different competencies can come together to create the best gamification experience for our students. So that's future implications, but I think as educators, just being aware of what gamification tools we're using and where do they fall in this line, trying to find a balance of this, because if all of our gamification tools are focused just on progression, we might miss that opportunity for the social piece, right? The relatedness. So balancing it out between that. So gamification in action. Gamification leads to so many wonderful benefits, such as higher retention rates and continuation rates. We see increased motivation, which again, thinking back to behaviorism with extrinsic and intrinsic motivation, that really is a driving force behind it. Self-determination theory, right? We talked about the three psychological needs, as well as improved desirable learning behaviors and increased student satisfaction. So again, it's very important for us to know there are wonderful benefits of gamification, but we can take it a step further by understanding the different theory connections and how we can really, again, try to find a balance between these different elements of immersion-oriented, progression-oriented, and social-oriented affordances. One example that I found during my research that I thought was really important to point out when we're thinking back to self-determination theory is that avatars, for example, those are a great example of autonomy, right? Students get to choose, they get to develop their characters. However, if an avatar has limited options and it doesn't have characters, let's say, that are relatable to them and include diversity, then a student actually might lose their complete interest in that gamification element. And so I think there's some really great opportunities as well to dive deeper and look at what are ways that we can ensure that our gamification is diverse and inclusive and equitable for our students. And again, one of the last points I want to point out that was brought up in another study that I had researched was talking about the competency. So students have the opportunity, right, to level up, but if something is too easy for them, they can also lose that interest. So it really is a balancing act. There's so much wonderful educational technology out there for gamification, but I think it's important as educators that we start to think what is really going to have the best results for our students, and going back to those foundational theories, thinking about those pieces, the psychological needs as well. So with that, the question, to gamify or not to gamify. So in order to effectively apply gamification, it is important to identify and understand the key theories that are behind it. While I was writing and doing this research, it was apparent that gamification will and should look very different in every classroom, right? A way that you're going to use gamification in a math classroom is probably going to look really different than it would in a science classroom. Science might be more simulation based, or math might be more progression based, and that's okay. Again, kind of thinking what are the goals and which gamification platforms or components can support that. But I think this really opened my eyes to the importance of trying to create a framework around gamification with those self-determination theory elements in mind and those three main affordances in mind to help guide teachers. Because I think from subject area as well as, elementary, middle, and high school, it diversifies and it changes so much their overall goals between grade level and classes and subject. So I'm really excited to see as this continues to expand and the opportunities that are made available to support our students, because I really do think by understanding the three theories and the key components of gamification, that you can really start to gamify your classroom in a more meaningful way that ultimately will lead your students to academic success. So with that is my presentation. I'll open it up to any questions that anyone might have and stop sharing my screen here in just a second, but my email is up there. So if you'd like to connect to talk about anything more, I would be more than happy to do that, as well as my LinkedIn. I would love to see the research that you all are working on, as well as share some of my future research as well. So thank you.
Thank you. I was, like I said, I was kind of typing some notes to myself. So just out of curiosity, you had talked about doing kind of some research and things. So what is that gonna, do you think, like, what is that gonna look like, or what kind of what are you doing with that, I guess?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. So right now I have the opportunity to work with Dr. Brown with an organization or a business called FlowOps, and they're actually gamifying their learning platform. So we're going to be doing research to see the impacts of that and how it translates as well into self-regulated learning behaviors. So actual real world application of that. So I'm excited to see how that looks. And then I really do want to dive deeper into the literature to find out more about what's out there, because I feel like I've started to skim the surface and realized, wow, there's a lot of different things in different places based on self-determination theory. If there's more that I can maybe take to develop a sort of framework around that and with the different affordances, I would be interested in doing that as well.
Interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of, I've always been, and I wouldn't call myself a gamer as far as the digital kind of games, but always, growing up playing cards with my grandmother, like the puzzles and the games were always something. And I was kind of like, oh, I was really excited that like it got to be more prevalent in like education and in a learning environment, and how like you can make these learning things you can't make them fun. And it's nice to see and know some of the theories behind, like, okay, well, this is, makes sense. You still have people that, are kind of like, why, games, why, that's not learning, but, it is. But so it's just kind of interesting.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the last couple of years have definitely shifted more towards the digital games, but the physical games too have such an important element in the classroom. I remember with my middle school students, we did like physical escape rooms, and they were, walking all around. And again, thinking back now, knowing the basis of like self-determination theory and thinking like the choices that they got to do, the community that they were building in those interactions, like it makes sense why they liked that a lot more than maybe some of the other things that I was doing. So yeah, games are fun. I think there's definitely a place for them from kindergarten classrooms through higher education as well.
Oh, definitely. I think what it becomes is you have to look at, doing, kind of like you said, making it meaningful, making it purposeful, making it related to your objectives, to your curriculum. Because that's where, that learning is going to happen. Like, just having a random game, I'm sure, there's aspects of like, social and other things with that, like problem solving and things, but like, if you're taking it into sort of that education, like, having those things as part of gamification or part of serious games, or, all of the lingo and jargon that's out there about it. I think that's the key to it. And I think people just assume like, what do you mean games? Why are we playing Monopoly? And that's not necessarily so just, but that's really interesting. Thank you. I enjoyed the presentation and got some good notes and thinking about, projects and things I'm working on. So
Of course, I'm really glad to hear that. And thank you for listening. This was my first presentation as a doctoral student. So I very much appreciated your comments, and I'm glad that I brought some new insights. So thank you.
yeah, well, you did a very good job. It was a good balance between kind of theory and not theory. So an example. So
Thank you.
I'd give you an A+ if that,
That means the world to me. Thank you.
Yeah,
well, good luck with everything and the rest of your, program and everything. So
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.